morning. And thanks for your time this morning.
Thank
and
you
I suppose on this day, and we've had all these tragedies, all the children who've fallen into pit latrines, those who've died, one of them having survived in the past couple of weeks. But you have to ask the question, Sanjay, why? Why in 2018, even if you are in South Africa, even if you are in Limpopo, is there not a proper toilet for a child to use?
So, Yuek, I think that's a really good question. And I think looking at this from a global perspective, South Africa isn't alone in this journey. I mean, there are about 600 million children across the world who don't have proper sanitation in schools. There are about 890 million people who don't even have a toilet. They don't even use a toilet. They practice what's called open defecation. So it is a big problem. And South Africa has made a lot of progress over the last 20 years or so, but a lot still remains to be done. And I think part of the problem is that it is, on the one hand, it's an easy problem to solve. It's just about toilets. We know how to do that. It's not new technology. But at the same time, there are real issues about maintaining them, keeping them in good condition, and making sure that all the other things that are needed, like hand-washing facilities and the kind of hygiene awareness, all those things come together as a package. So you're right. I think in this day and age we shouldn't be having these things happening, but I'm sure that with concerted action, with everyone working together, we can address them.
So who's the everyone? Who needs to be doing what?
So there's a huge role, of course, for governments, because governments set the standards and governments also regulate and monitor. And where there's no one else, governments also have to actually provide the services and do the job. But there are roles for other people as well, particularly civil society and NGOs, non-governmental organizations, because what's important is not just about the infrastructure of a toilet, but people have to, and it may seem obvious to some of us, but people have to want to use a toilet. And there are hundreds of millions of people in the world, as I mentioned, who don't. So people have to want to use a toilet, and people have to maintain the toilet. Otherwise, they fall into disrepair, and you see these kind of tragedies. And there's also a role for the private sector companies, because a lot of the problem is that there aren't good quality products at the right price for poor people, particularly people in rural areas. And I think that's a big failure, and that's something where the private sector also has a role to play.
Which shouldn't have to take a child to die for toilets to be quickly built, which means there could have been. Somebody somewhere just didn't really feel the need to.
So I think it's absolutely tragic that these incidents are occurring, and you know, it's hard to imagine anything worse. It should not happen. Not one child should die or in fact fall into a toilet. I think part of the solution and the difficulties that we're working through and collectively is that this requires a partnership between government, communities, schools, even health centres and so on. So it's that working together bit that is, you know, that's part of the solution, but is also a little bit difficult at times.
So as UNICEF, are you actively involved in sort of in this drive to get decent sanitation? Are you working with the role players here? Is that part of what you do?
Yes, we are. So we obviously have we play a role globally. We're one of the biggest agencies internationally working on sanitation. But also in South Africa, we are supporting the President's initiative around making sure that every school has toilets. And we're supporting it with both bringing in our technical expertise, but also kind of taking forward the President's initiative to bring together corporates and private sector around the table so they can also contribute.
Is there a time frame, Sanjay, as to when we can say that most toilets, if not all, would actually be, the schools would have decent toilets for children, or decent facilities?
So it's not really for me to set time frames.
What would be a reasonable time frame?
So the government has a program, and the Department of Basic Education is leading that program to provide that infrastructure. But I think if we all come together, and particularly if we can get the private sector addressing this problem, not just about building toilets themselves, but actually making sure that the right products and services, that they invest in it, because, you know, it's not the high end of the market, but it is still necessary, and that they invest in the right products and services, then I think we could get the job done very quickly.
Okay, something most of us take for granted. Thanks very much
Absolutely.
for your time. And that's UNICEF South Africa representative Sanjay Wijesekera. He's also the former chief of UNICEF's Water and Sanitation Program, talking to us on World Toilet Day.